late game here in 1880 China by 00 Games, and I've just reached the point, I think I discussed it, where no new companies were opening up and it didn't look like the trains were going to move on. The 6Es just disappeared because people had finished buying them. So we've got, but I've just hit the point where we've got a decision to make, because the Jingha Railway here with this 6E train on it, because it's in the top right corner of the share chart, it's getting plus 40 on its payout per share, so plus 400 on its run. And so it's just run for 660, 400 of which is the bonus from the share chart, and 260 of which is the actual run from its 6E train. But that 660, if it withheld payment, plus the 250 it's already got, would give it enough cash to buy an 8 train for 800, which would rust the 4s. So the only reason to do this is to rust the 4s, because there's a 4 train here on the Jinghu, there's a 4 train here on the Chengkung. His own Binju has got a 4, there's a 4 train here on the Jinglan, and there's a 4 train up there on the Baocheng. So each of his competitors has got a 4 train on one of their companies, and he's got one himself. So rusting those 4s might be quite a good idea. On the other hand, the cost is significant, because he's run for 660. So the cost will be the 70% payout of that 660 that he would be pocketing right now if he were just to pay out, which would be 462, I've just calculated. So he's losing that 462 income directly into his stack. He's also going to move back on the share chart, which would put him back on a plus 20 payout, which means his next run isn't going to be 660, it's going to be 460 back in the pack until he moves back up again. That would leave him susceptible as well to people selling his shares and then dropping him out of the zone where he might get back up into the 40 mark, although he's a little bit susceptible to that anyway. But he'd be one stage removed from this monster plus 40 payout, and he might never get back there, depending on how people pranked him if there was a share round. So he's got that to consider as well. So he might then lose, not just lose the 460 now, but then be losing 200 a run for future runs. He'll lose 200 a run for at least one run, and possibly more. So yeah, this is not a straightforward calculation, but I think on balance he's probably wisest to withhold the money and take the 8 train, because obviously I say he's losing 200 a run, he's losing the 200 bonus, but the 8 train plus a 6E, he is a little bit tokened out, but you know, he ought to be able to do something. Reasonable there. So yeah, I think he's going to go for it. I think he's going to take the 8 train and move us on. So that was an interesting, or a complicated decision to try and make, and I'm not doing full massive calculations into it and trying to work out what people are making from their 4 trains. I'm just going to go a little bit instinctive and say 4 players all losing a 4 train is probably good for my chances, so I'm going to go for it. So the purchase of that 8 train by the Jingha has had a couple of other effects. The first is that it's opened up the availability of grey tiles, the final set of tiles, but at the same time it has moved us into phase D, where virtually no one has a work permit. Reckless Rachel, neither of her companies have a D permit. Payout Pamela, neither of these companies have a work permit. Cautious Charlie, neither of his companies have a work permit. Balanced Bernie has just used his engineers here, the Gem Tien Yao Engineer Office, to put a D work permit on the Hukun Railway with his 2/6 trains. So he does have a work permit, but the Jinglan does not. And down here, Train Mad Tony's Ningxi Railway has a BCD. So only 2 of the 5 players have a single company out of their 2 which have work permits. Now, you know, we go back to this decision. Do any of the opening any of the other companies at 40%, and grabbing a D work permit makes sense? And the answer is no, not really, because they're still pretty much blocked into areas of the map where they're just run into heavy tokens, and breaking into anywhere that would make more money than the shares you've got running at, you know, 24, 26 a share, just isn't going to happen. So I think we're now in the final stages where we're running through payouts. Jing Ha has just acted and bought a train. So we're now running through our remaining companies, and then we're going to hit the point where no one's buying a train. That 8 train goes and we get 3 runs. So we are in the final stages. Unfortunately, these final stages, I mean, there's not a lot to do because not much track can be built. These guys will do some upgrades, no doubt, to try and make their runs more profitable, but they've got to be careful not to reopen routes that are tokened out and make other people's runs really profitable. So they've got some balancing to do, and some care to take with their builds. Beyond that, though, we're into a kind of accounting exercise where we're just stacking up money and trying to count up the most profitable runs as the board state sort of changes by degree. So in terms of super complex, interesting decisions, or strategic decisions, I should say, I think we're pretty much done. But there are still complex decisions about route upgrades for 2 of the players to make. And then I think we're done. So I think I'm just going to run through this and hit final scoring, unless anything eye-opening in the route building opens up. And this could take me quite a while, unfortunately, because, like I say, making you know 4 sets of runs on this board is you know, takes a lot of mental arithmetic more than anything else. Just takes a lot of mental arithmetic and a lot of moving poker chips around. I could spreadsheet it, I suppose, but I would fear that I do that too simplistically, and not actually make the runs and give people the money and incorporate those potential changes as the board state shifts. And also a lot of every player's just lost a forward train, so I'm going to have to recalculate routes anyway. So yeah, a bit of chuntering through maths now to get to the end. Well, the Ningxi Railway here, which hasn't been doing badly but has never been stellar, had 500 cash, or just over 500 cash on it. And because it had finally bumped up into the +5 zone on the share price chart, was able to bring in a run of over 300, and that gave it, by withholding more than 800, and it was able to pick up this 8 train here. That's the second 8 train gone, so the only 2 8 trains have just been bought, which pushes us into a share round, and this also means that we are officially on the endgame clock now. We get 3 goes round from here, starting with the JLR and ending in 3 runs time with the Ningxi. There are no more stock rounds after this one. We're going into a stock round now because the 8's been bought, but there are no more stock rounds. We just run and run and run until someone, until we get to the end, and then we toss up the cash. So as I said before, we are hitting the end game here, and I've just got an awful lot of runs to do now with 10 companies, which is going to take me some time, but it is good to feel like we're in the home straight. In the meantime, we've got some share trading to do, and I suppose this could all get a bit unscrupulous as well, as people try and sell stuff that doesn't look promising, or just dump stock to try and drop people down the chart here so that they can't get up into the top corner. And yeah, and we'll see how it goes. So I think there'll be some fairly mean sort of stock selling about to happen, and people might try and buy into companies that are sort of up and coming and look like they can make lots of share price improvement cash on, because the SCR, for example, take the SCR here, it's just moved into the +10 zone, so it's going to be +10, +15 on its runs. Yeah, I suppose it's going to move up 3 times, 1, 2, 3, so you're going to make 30 cash on it. Let's say this makes 3 runs, 1, 2, 3. Okay, you're only going to make 20 cash on it. Okay, so the higher value stocks are going to look more attractive. So it's sort of swings and roundabouts whether you dump them to hurt the share price, but then have to buy something that isn't going to perform so well in order. Yeah, I'm not sure I can even be bothered to think about it. Having looked at the chart and done that very rough calculation, I'm not sure anyone can really be bothered to change their portfolio that much. I may just carry on with and say that people are content to see how things fall out with the share portfolios that they've got. Yeah, that might be easiest and save me an awful lot of time. And if then it turns out that some shares were a very bad idea, well, you live and learn, don't you? So let's call the share round done and just kick on into 3 sets of operating rounds. So I've finished here in 1880. We've just finished the last of the 3 final operating rounds. You can see the payout chart there, showing the sort of company payouts. The JHU is right there at the top, but it was off the chart. It was up to 97. JHA, the orange one, was off the chart to 97. And there's a few clustered at the 60 mark, and then a few in this sort of 35 to 45 range per share. And the final share price chart, 3 companies made it up to the top 200, and then a couple of the late companies nearly made it, and then the second cluster down here in the sort of 105 to 130 range. So we've got great stacks of cash for all the players here with these chips that I've got, but the final totals were our first player here, Train Mad Tony, with the Baocheng and the Ningxi Railways. He finished last with 6,777. He was just last for his share portfolio, 2,500 roughly, and about 4,200 in cash. Our second player here, Balanced Bernie, finished in 4th place, nearly 3rd, about 100, less than 100 in it. 7,049, so 6,777 over here. 7,049 finished him in 4th place, 2,755 in shares and 4,294 in cash. He had this Jinglan, which did terribly with that with that rail cock up, and then it couldn't run the train. It's a train it had. It was all just blocked, tokened out, and yeah, horrible. And the HKR actually got badly tokened out as well. And so Balanced Bernie went from a very strong position, looking like a contender, to drifting out of contention. Our fourth player here, Payout Pamela, she finished third, 7,192. So that's, yeah, about 100, sorry, Balanced Bernie in fourth had 7,049, so she had 7,192. She had this Xichang Railway, which was making all the early money, but then got tokened out and had some train difficulties. And the Chen Kung, which did extremely well throughout the game, actually. This came on really strong. She had 2,555 in shares and 4,637 in cash. In second place, Reckless Rachel, who was doing terribly at one stage of the game, came through really, really strongly. She had this black JHU and she had 80% of it, and she had this blue Qinshen Railway which she had 90% of, and they both were making her loads and loads of money. The JHU was running at 63 and she had 80% of it, and the Qinshen was running at 35, but she had 90% of it, and so they were both making her payouts, and of course the Qinshen was just constantly rising in share price. So she finished second on 8,281, a good 1,000 ahead of third place, 7,192 to 8,281, so nearly 1,100 ahead. 3,325 in shares, which was by far the strongest share portfolio. She had 80% of the Jinghu, which hit 200 per share, and she also had some Baocheng and some Jingha, so she had strong share portfolio. 3,325 and 4,956 in cash rate, 281, and pretty much leading throughout the whole game, but nearly caught up was Cautious Charlie here, who was the player who started out with no plan at all as to what private companies to buy, and just went for some northern routes and hoped that no one messed him around, and no one really did. And he was able to make consistently, not until the end was he making the best money, but he was able to make consistently strong money with this Jingha Railway out of Beijing. And this Binzhu running on the same track also got some good tokens down, made plenty of good cash. So he finished, Cautious Charlie, 2,880 in shares, but 5,472 in cash. That was 500 ahead of the next competitor. That gave him 8,352. So if I just run down the final scores here, 677, 7, 7049, 8352, 7192, and 8281. Those were the scores for our 5 players. Yeah, this has been super to play all the way through. Really enjoyable. It did get just slightly grindy at the end here. We're doing these 3 runs with not much happening, no one able to lay tokens anywhere useful either, or not having the cash for their final token and not wanting to withhold a payout in order to be able to lay a token where there was nothing really useful to do with it. And no one either able to break the deadlock by opening up the players with phase D builds. The trouble that they had was that coming after them was a player with enough money still on its treasury for a token, so all they were doing, if they opened up a station with a build but without having the cash to token it themselves, was letting the Chen Kung token it instead, and that didn't seem very sensible, so that kind of thing didn't happen. So yes, they're just the last couple of operating rounds, but we just rattled them through, and the share the payout per share chart remained pretty static because we knew what our best runs were, and the track wasn't changing, and the token the trains weren't changing, and The only thing we had to watch out for was when companies went up a step on this chart from, say, the +5s to the +10s, then you just added another +5 on that payout and went from there. So it did actually only take probably 45 minutes to run through the final couple of sets of operating rounds once the game had stabilised and nothing else much was changing. What I said previously still holds for this, is that what I found was that in 5-player playing, solo 5-handed, was that there was always something challenging to think about for each of the players. None of them ever felt like they had nothing to do. None of them ever really felt like they had no decisions to make. None of them ever felt like they were just in a static or unimprovable position. They always felt like they had things that they could try and do to improve or make gains, until you hit this sort of final bit of payout rounds, and then everything was pretty static. But for 98% of the game, they all felt like they had useful, challenging decisions to make, and important decisions to make about how to invest and how to grow and what companies to open, how to try and schedule their train purchases and so on, how to finance their companies and to what extent, and what that was going to allow them to do. Yeah, I'm not saying I played them all well, but no one sort of crashed and burned and went bankrupt. Everyone was competent enough to stay afloat and run a company with at least a viable train on it. As it turned out, the 4+4s were permanent trains, because no one got into an AT. So yeah, from a playing it 18xx solo perspective, this has been a fantastic experience, because there's just so much to keep you occupied and so much to look at without having to play a game of, oh, does he realise that this company's in a terrible state and he's got 30% of it and I'm about to dump it, and blah blah blah. There's none of that kind of second guessing what players are watching and thinking about and looking at, and whether they get shafted by another player or not, kind of nonsense. You can just play each player as competently as you can and see what falls out, which is really nice. Yeah, I like the addition of the work permits, the train's disappearing if no one buys them. This whole ordering mechanic on the companies is really nice. The track is there's plenty of it, but there's not sort of it seems there's no wacky track that does crazy loops and weird shit. The track there's plenty of it, but it's all pretty basic. So once, for example, you've got a green sort of crossover like that, as far as I can tell, nothing's happening. That's just not upgradable. So apart from upgrading cities and towns and going from yellow to green, once you've gone from yellow to green, if it's not a city or a town or a double town, there ain't nothing happening really, and that makes the track laying relatively straightforward to think about. Certainly once you get a layout established, you pretty much know that there's no sort of clever trickery in terms of reordering it or fighting your way through to cities that you can't really get to. A lot of the time, once it's laid out, you're a bit bang out of luck. So there were developments that happened later on up north that opened up interesting routes, but they weren't brilliantly optimized layouts, and they often led to 4+4 trains having an awful time trying to work out how to hit four cities and 4 towns and make more money than if they just hit 4 and 2 or whatever. So that was 1880, an extremely enjoyable part of the 18xx series, and now I'm packing it up and moving on to something else.